Welcome to Changing Higher Ed, a podcast dedicated to helping higher education leaders improve their institutions. With your host, Dr. Drumm McNaughton, CEO of The Change Leader, a consultancy that helps higher ed leaders holistically transform their institutions. Learn more at changinghighered.com. And now, here's your host, Drumm McNaughton.
Hello, listeners. Welcome back to our annual end of the year review, where we take a look at 2024. It's been one heck of a year, and guess who I've got to be my co-host for this? My regular Washington Update guest, Tom Netting. Tom, welcome back to the show.
How are you, Drumm?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Still a busy time, still a frenetic pace as we literally head into the last 3 weeks of the year. Congress is still in session, as we know, but lots going on.
Oh, yeah, no kidding. I am so pleased that you were willing to join me. Deb Maui has done this with me for 4 years, and with her job responsibility, she just wasn't able to. You're not a substitute. You're the A string who was just sitting on the bench for a few years, waiting for his turn at bat. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm kind of liking the notion of a role reversal here.
So with that, I am going to cede the gavel to you, my friend. Take it away.
Well, thank you, and thank you for providing me this opportunity. So, Drumm, here's the thing. I went back and looked at your predictions with Deb for 2024, and I don't know whether to call you Nostradamus or Karnak or any one of the other individuals that are phenomenal prognosticators, because candidly, your top 10 and your predictions pretty much hold true to form. So kudos to you to start off with, sir. Let's talk about the 10. Again, at the top of your list was increase in politics. As the aforementioned start of this presentation went, we can't ever get away from that. But you talked about the fact that the political environment and the involvement of higher education was going to be particularly important in an election year. And certainly we saw some of that.
Well, it's one of those things that's intuitively obvious to the most casual observer. Whenever you enter a presidential election year, it's all going to happen. And it happens even more given the extreme polarization that we have between the two political parties.
And the interesting thing is, we're going to talk about your predictions and the year in review. Certainly, I'm assuming that there will be a prediction on where we go with higher education into 2025.
Oh, I wouldn't even dream of doing that, Tom.
Oh, come on. Again, one that was kind of not too hard to predict, but you went a little bit deeper than most people would. You talked about the concerns with declining enrollment growth across the higher education community, and you specifically talked about the impact on regional institutions and some of the private institutions, as well as the flagship universities. Again, you were on point. We have definitely seen some drops in the overall enrollments of institutions. So again, whatever it was that you were pulling from your spidey senses worked. Little care to comment on that?
Yeah, the enrollment drops, they really happen for a number of reasons. We're going to get into those more, but the big challenge that I think caused a lot of the drop that wasn't expected had to do with the FAFSA rollout. We'll talk about that more, but that was a sucker punch that nobody was expecting.
Well, and again, it's interesting. You also talked about public perception of college value and the trust in overall education. I certainly think that the FAFSA rollout played a major role in some of that in terms of both the number of drops in overall FAFSA forms last year for the first time, a 9% decrease. But again, you were in tune with these things well in advance. Acquisition targets was another area where you forecasted that there would be issues around the acquisition mode of institutions and struggling institutions. We certainly have seen some of that. Again, where will you pull in the information from on that one?
I've got relationships with a lot of different universities, with their presidents, as well as people who work in the higher education area. And everybody is seeing the same things. We've got more capacity than we have students. It's just going to get worse once we get into the enrollment cliff, as it's called. But these institutions, they're running deficits. They don't have good endowments. They don't have strong endowments. And if you've got less than 1,000 students, you're at risk.
Well, and again, you talked about that both from the targeting of acquisitions. But again, the demographic clip, I'm going to pull a little bit more on that string of the tapestry here in a little bit when we talk about their year in review. You also were on point with regard to technology and AI. My goodness, you can't go anywhere right now without discussions around what is AI doing that's favorable, and is it going to also take over our entire world?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting because with AI, you've got your quote traditionalists who anything that AI puts out there is plagiarized. And then you've got other institutions, and Madeline Pumariega is a great example of this, the president at Miami-Dade College. They fully embraced AI. They've got programs, et cetera. They're exposing their students, and they've been doing this for 4 years now. So you've got multiple different spectrums. AI is going to change everything that we do. Is it going to replace jobs? Absolutely. We'll get to more of that.
Absolutely. And again, kind of building some of these things together just so we can have the movement to the year in review and the predictions, because I'm looking forward to those. You also did note that adapting to students' needs, I think AI plays into that to a large degree. You talked about the pandemic as well and the fact that we would continue to see ongoing challenges for student bodies because of the pandemic and the shift that caused. Again, you were spot on with both of those in terms of both the lost periods of time for, and maybe even a lost cohort of students with the challenge that came about as a result of that.
I'm going to be really hard on myself on this one. There was a push for professors to adapt teaching methods to meet students at their needs, but by and large, most of the faculty still have the attitude that, and it's sad, but it's true. I wouldn't say most, but I'd say a lot of the faculty still have the attitude that students need to meet to where the faculty is rather than faculty step down to meet where the students are. That doesn't work in situations like this, especially with the COVID, the drop, but also too with first gen students, low SES students. You've got to be able to meet the student where they are, not vice versa.
Well, interestingly enough, I don't be too hard on yourself. Don't beat yourself too much on that one, because I truly do believe that I think they're getting there. Culture shifts take time, Drum, and sometimes it takes a little longer for the old dog to try and be taught new tricks.
Uh, well said, Tom. I'm not going to say a word.
We can hope that all of us old dogs, I'll put myself in that category,
Oh,
can
yes.
continue to learn new tricks. I am one that believes, and you've shared this with me as well on your end, if you're not learning, you're not living. So the ability
Yep.
to continue to always try and learn is always important.
This,
Intense tutoring programs. You also talked specifically about the fact that you thought that shorter term programs, especially for tutoring or even in shorter term credentials, I'll ad lib that part, were going to be something that we were going to see more of. And certainly in legislative policy and even in discussions on the regulatory front, we are seeing a kind of a regeneration of a recognition of shorter term programs.
yes. And, that along with adapting to student needs mix very well. There have been studies and institutions who have done this have seen 4 months, 3 to 4 months of intense tutoring to get students back up to the stage, they will gain a year in academic progress. So there is a way to overcome the COVID deficits, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to step out and do these kind of things.
And again,
Problematic, they cost money.
absolutely, absolutely. But again, I hope that as we talk about predictions for 2025 and also the year in review, I think that again, I play to my strengths or my comfort level. I think you are seeing Congress and the regulatory environment looking to try and meet those challenges head on, because we all know that, like we talked about just moments ago, there are groups of students, whether it be at the K through 12 level, certainly, and those are the ones that I think everybody is most concerned about. But there was a lost group of higher education students in all of this as well. And their ability to matriculate and to enter into the work world, I think is something else that we're going to need to be mindful of going forward.
I think you're absolutely right.
Okay, so now that we've gone through, and I would give you an A, I was going to give you an A plus, but you were hard on yourself, so I'll back it down to an A. But I'll tell you what, to have those 10 predictions and to have the conversation you had with Deb literally a year ago and see how close and spot on you were on so many issues, do you have tonight's lotto numbers?
I wish I did. Trust me, I'd be announcing my retirement a couple of years early if
Well,
I did.
and that's why I'm asking you to share it, because then we can both retire, Drum.
Tom, you're too much needed in where you're doing, but thank you.
Well, and likewise, my friend. Again, I don't want to make this a kumbaya party, but again, you're not allowed to retire anytime soon.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit deeper and delve into these issues a little bit more. The one issue that I kind of left off of your predictions was the impact of the potential elections. So I'm going to start there because again, that was kind of a softball one, Drum. I mean, come on. Elections are always going to have an impact on where the policies go.
Well, of course. Why do you think I made that as my first prediction of the year?
Well, there you go.
But this one is a major, major change. We've seen Congress, we've seen the country, and the country, frankly, or Congress reflects what's going on in the country. It is incredibly divided. You've got the left with policies, you've got the right with policies. It's a pendulum swing. It goes from Democrat. When Bush was in office, if you take a look back 20 years or 25 years, you had Bush Jr., which I know that it's W rather than his father. But when W was in office, the pendulum was over to the right a bit. It wasn't huge. They really started getting on the accountability bandwagon with that. Obama came in and it swung to the left, probably more than did Bush to the right. For example, the Dear Colleague letter having to do with Title IX was a major, major change in policy.
Again, so simpatico, because that was what I was thinking of as you were making the presentation. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt you, but keep
no,
going.
no worries. Then you had Trump 1 come in and they made a lot of changes to the right. For example, they did away with, I shouldn't say did away, but they changed the Title IX to where it was not preponderance of evidence, it was a more stringent standard. It wasn't beyond a shadow of a doubt, et cetera, et cetera. But they changed the evidentiary. They changed a lot of the processes about Title IX. They also did, and we're going to get to this, they also went in with accreditation. And instead of having regional accreditors and national, everyone was an institutional. So there's only two types of accreditors. You have institutional accreditors and you have programmatic accreditors. That is a major, major change. Trying to level the playing field, that has not worked quite so well. Trump 2 looks like that pendulum is going to swing back even harder to the right than it was in Trump 1. They're talking about disbanding the Department of Education, diversity issues. The right is very much against any kind of DEI. So, what are they going to do with that? There are just so many unknowns right now. And we're in the period before the inauguration. All we can do is speculate based on his political appointments, his cabinet members, and some of the things that he has said on the campaign trail and they have said. So it's going to be a major, major thing. I think the one thing we will see, and this is a prediction, we will see some form of the Higher Education Act overhauled. Will it be the full act? I don't think so. I don't think they'll ever be able to redo that. But there are many things that they need to redo. Your thoughts? Does this make sense to you? Because you're in the thick of this.
This would have been a Karnak moment if they would have seen us on video. Yes, I think you very much so. The things that I'm looking at, Drum, are we haven't had a reauthorization of the Higher Education Act since 2008. We are, to say overdue would be an understatement of
Yeah.
significant magnitude to the nth degree, so to speak. So yes, I do think that you're going to see an opportunity for a reauthorization to take place. And look, we're going through potentially some of the lead up or the run up to that right now. Dr. Fox had been working so diligently and vigilantly on the College Cost Reduction Act. She and the Republicans pursued trying to put that into the CR that is literally falling apart as we speak. But that's another conversation for another podcast. But what their goal was is to try and bring it forward this year in order to then bring it forward next year as part of the budget resolution and the budget reconciliation process.
Mhm.
So I think that you are spot on yet again in your reading of the future, so to speak, in terms of the desire to move forward with at least portions, as you said as well. Interestingly enough, accreditation, outcomes, and other issues that you talked about, and maybe that we dig a little deeper when we get to predictions, are things that are going to be relevant and important as we go forward with those conversations. And quite honestly, the continuation of the focus on workforce education as well as academics in the broader context of student enrichment.
Mhm. I wanna come back to what you just said about workforce development, education, things along those lines. I believe that's very important that we have that. But I think to do that and to disparage a 4-year or even a 3-year bachelor's degree, and we'll talk about that because there are shifts going on. We're starting to focus, and I'm gonna equate this to what I observe in some of the younger generations and even in my generation as well, this instant gratification type thing. The college education doesn't prepare you for a particular career or your first job. It prepares you for a career and your life. That's what it's supposed to do. And if you take away that period, if you focus so much on that first job, you're not giving the students the tools that they need to be able to be successful in life. AAC&U, the American Association of Colleges and Universities, comes out every year, couple of years, and they have a survey that they do. I believe it's with Gallup, but I may be wrong, that looks at what are the key skills that higher ed needs to teach and that employers want in graduates. The number one, the ability to work in teams, critical thinking, being able to look at data and draw conclusions. I mean, these are not STEM skills, these are life skills. And if we're doing away and we're focusing on, let's just get them to their first job, are they going to have those skills that they need to progress in a career going forward? I think that's a TBD.
I do too, but again, you also need to consider Democrats and Republicans alike, Drum, are spending a lot of time on debt to earnings
Mhm.
because there is so much federal dollars in the higher education process. Depending on what numbers you look at, the 1.1 to 1.5 or 6 trillion dollars in student loan, there is going to continue to be on both sides of the aisle. And part of the dynamic in these discussions going forward, I truly do think is going to be a much more in-depth look across all sectors of higher education on what the return of investment is from the federal fiscal interest
Mhm.
on higher education.
Yeah. And I don't think that is wrong to do, but I just hope that when people start looking at these type of things, they look at it from the broader perspective versus just saying, well, this person graduated from college and then they had to go work at a lower paid job versus being able to move into a CEO role. And I'm being facetious at this
No,
point,
and
but
to be
yeah.
sure. But again, and the challenge of that is always the devil of the details. How do you find that right balance? And candidly, the same way you and I are talking about it now, that's been the charge of all the individuals on both sides of the aisle and both types of administration to do so. And again, that conversation will continue on for quite some time. You,
Yeah.
you talked about this and you kind of gave me a good segue into the notion of what the perception of the public and the higher education community are. Let's talk a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, that's a challenging thing because if you take a look at the polling that's out there, 10 years ago, higher ed had a very high public perception, strongly approve, et cetera. And that seems to have reversed. Now, is that related to politics and the way that politics and the media are talking about things? Does this have to do with student debt, the cost of education? Frankly, I don't think you can say it's one or the other. I think it's just a combination thereof.
I think it's all that and then some.
Absolutely. But the challenge is being a university president right now is far more difficult than it's ever been because it is way more politicized. Take, for example, the October 7th and the anti-Semitism hearings. You've got 3 of the 6 presidents who appeared are gone. One of them was in the process of leaving and had already announced their retirement. It's not easy. And these are some of, if not the top higher ed institutions in the country. We can't have this. The presidency is hard enough as it is. We need to pull higher ed out of the political realm. Now, how that happens, I have no idea. Maybe we'll make a prediction on that one and see if I can wreck my 4.0
Your
average.
4.0 average. Well, here's an amazing thing, Drum. Literally, as we were speaking, there was just a report that was released by Speaker Johnson, as well as the House leadership and Dr. Fox, along with others, on a 7-month-long investigation into anti-Semitism across the American college campuses. Obviously, I haven't read it or know anything that's in it. But to your point, again, damn you, Karnak, that literally just happened as we were speaking and as you were talking about that very issue.
Yeah.
Take that into a couple of other things that are important to the American public with regard to higher education. Free speech and issues around academic freedom. I mean, again, I don't want to mix these because I don't see them as direct areas of contention, but both of them seem to be on the minds of the media as well as others when it comes to the positioning of those colleges in their enrichment of the lives of individuals and how they bestow that upon them or help them to achieve that themselves, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's very sad that higher ed has become as politicized as it is. There are many folks on the right who feel like higher education is just a bastion of liberalism. And all you're doing is, and I use this term deliberately, all you're doing is grooming young people to be flaming liberals. And it's a shame because, yes, many of the faculty are very liberal. There are conservative as well, but you're not there to become more liberal or less liberal or more conservative, less. You're there to be exposed to multiple perspectives so that you can make your own mind up as far as how you believe, what is important to you. We've gotten past that. If you take a look at Florida, Florida is really, it's ground zero for attempting to remake higher education. More than a fifth of the professors at the University of Florida went through the post-tenure review and they failed. Why? It recently required the reviews. You have New College, which was a shining star as far as a progressive. When I say progressive, I don't mean liberal. I mean just new ways of doing things. The governor there replaced the board. They've changed it. They want to make it like an ultra conservative higher education institution. And then at University of Florida, you had Ben Sasse, who, he has his PhD. He's been through the academic process. He just recently left after 18 months. And what happened there? It was not a good situation. So there's a lot of things. The Stop Woke Act, that was ruled to be unconstitutional, but it took, a very short time to do that. I want to say it was like 5 to 8 months to get that ruling. But we're seeing the same thing with DEI. We're seeing the same thing with institutional statements. Instead of coming out and making a stance, you've got many institutions saying, we are not going to say anything about it one way or the other. It's sad for me to see how much state legislatures are trying to legislate the restriction of academic freedom and free speech. I knew I'd get back to that at some point.
Knowing you, I knew you would as well. And again, this is one of those areas that I think, again, not giving you the easy out on this one, but I don't see this one going away anytime soon, Drum, either. I mean, this
No.
is something that we'll continue to see on both sides, the opinions continuing to manifest and be discussed quite diligently as we move on. Again, Talk about FIRE a little bit, the advocacy groups and some of the things that they've done with regard to campus censorship, because I know that that's, again, part of things that I know you've been looking at and tracking.
FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and they do a lot of work in that. I'm not going to try and position whether they're left, right, center, whatever, but they recently did a survey, and it was a very large survey, 6,000 faculty members, 55 different colleges. 1 in 7 faculty members said they were disciplined or threatened with discipline because of their teaching, research, academic discussions, or off campus speech. I mean, that's really disturbing. The Constitution that I read said in Article 1 said the government shall not legislate any laws restricting the free speech of its citizens or something to that effect. Religion, same type of thing. Freedom of the press, same type of thing. But we're seeing more and more state legislatures legislating things like the Stop Woke Act, which the court said, no, this is against Article 1. Texas faculty, they're starting to self-censor for fear of retaliation. That's where we're going. And that is very saddening to me. I'm sorry, I'm getting almost for a loss of words because it's very saddening to me. The purpose of higher education is to expose people to different viewpoints and allow them to make their own decision as to what their value system is. Some folks believe that we shouldn't expose them to them because it might get them to be this way. I mean, there's groups out there talking about this with transgender stuff. Come on, folks. People are smart. You don't have to deny them the ability to speak or talk about certain things. Other people can make up their minds.
Well, and I think one thing that's important there, Drum, again, in the interest of balance, and one of the facts directly from the FIRE report is it was actually more conservatives than liberal faculty members that said that they occasionally hid their own political beliefs. So again, this does cut across all instructors and all types of desire to share information with students at institutions of higher education, to your point. But again, I think it's important to note that, again, both sides have their concerns about that. Talking a little bit more about mature and declining industries and how, again, you talked about some of the concerns in your lead-in for 2024 about mergers and acquisitions and institutions that, candidly, before COVID, potentially might have been on the precipice of closure because of the hard times of enrollments and as well as other fiscal challenges. Let's talk a little bit more about the industry itself.
Well, if you remember Clayton Christensen, he predicted multiple years ago that 25% of all higher education institutions, it was either 25 or 50, I don't remember for sure, but they would be going out of business. And his co-author with this just recently came out and said, we're on track to even exceed those numbers that Clayton talked about. Well, here's the challenge. In 2010, we had 3.4 million students. Fast forward 15 years later, we have 3.9. The enrollment cliff, demographic cliff, whatever you call it, over the next 15 years, we're going to drop back down to 3.4. We have built all this capacity
For a shrinking number of students.
for a shrinking number of students. So that's part of it. That is the classic definition in business of a mature to declining market, is more capacity than you have customers.
And to that point, the competition and the challenge for that shrinking overall group of students is going to be even higher, correct?
Exactly. And that's where you're going to start seeing far more cuts of programs, closures, etc. Public perception goes into that as well because people are coming out and saying, we don't need a college degree. We can just go out and get a good paying job. Well, a good paying job right now for somebody out of high school is $40,000. Fast forward 10, 15 years, if you're still making 40, 45,000, but you've got a wife or a husband and 2 kids, 40,000, 45,000 isn't a good paying job. you have to be able to move up and progress. So the public perception isn't where it needs to be. But the cuts and closures, the closure rate's accelerating. In 2022, there were 50 closures. 2023, there were 80. This went up. In 2023, there were 14 nonprofits. This year, 2024, we've had 16, that number being made up of 50% of Christian colleges. So 8 of those closed. The common denominator? Small liberal arts colleges, enrollments of 1,000 or less, their endowments very small. What most folks don't think about, although there was a great article in the Chronicle that came out about this, when Wells College up in Aurora in the Finger Lakes district of New York closed, it came as a surprise to the town because of the impacts. The town depended on the college for its elementary school, water treatment plant, community medical center. This announcement left leaders scrambling. Not only does it affect the students and faculty, but it affects the towns that people are in, fewer jobs, etc. So, these are all things that folks aren't really thinking about, but it's a major impact when a college closes.
So again, to that, we also therefore can probably surmise fewer jobs, issues with regards to the loss and potential impact to the communities if these schools are closing, correct?
Right. Yes, absolutely. So, what's happening? There's the quote academic realignment that's going on. West Virginia, they cut 143 faculty positions, 28 programs. It's still not doing well. PASHE, the Pennsylvania State System for Higher Education, they did consolidations. They had 6 universities, 3 in the West, 3 in the East, that consolidated down to 1 West, 1 East. That is going a little bit better, but I think a lot of that has to do with Dan Greenstein and his pushing so hard as what he did. Root causes, the cost of higher ed is more than it's ever been, even in real dollars versus the inflationary dollars. They've tried to do debt forgiveness. That hasn't gone through well, and there's multiple reasons for that. I'd say the cost is the biggest reason why people are losing faith in higher ed. That and they're not finding the job that they want.
Well, and unfortunately, again, as I noted previously, they've lost a little bit of faith in the access point, meaning the FAFSA application, in order to try and help them make those very important decisions. I'm gonna jerk on your chain a little bit and remind you that there is also a place, and a very laudable place, for all of our skilled trades and the individuals who seek out very strong and very, very substantially fiscally capable programs in a number of the occupations. I think it was former Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare, John Gardner, who said, "Society which scorns excellence in plumbing as a humble activity and tolerates shoddiness in philosophy because it's an exalted activity will have neither good plumbing nor good philosophy. Neither its pipes nor its theories will hold water." So again, that was a quote I've been waiting to bring out to you at some point in time, and that seemed an apropos place to do it.
Classic, just so classic. There's a lot of things that need to be done and can be done, obviously, cost cutting. But remember, you're never going to cut your way to growth. Academic realignment. The problem with academic realignment and shared governance frequently gets in the ways of this restructuring. Connecticut's found that out in a major, major way of trying to realign academic programs. It needs to be done, but you've got to somehow get faculty on board. The other mergers, acquisitions, we're seeing far more activity. Our firm has done quite a bit with that as well. And unfortunately, there's closures as well, and we're seeing that.
Now, you talked a lot about the demographic clip. And let's be honest, enrollments, I mean, again, the students are the engine that drive our universities and institutional systems. I mean, that is, again, the access to post-secondary education is the number of individuals. We already talked about the fact that that is in decline. Care to talk a little bit more about that cliff? Because again, there's never enough to talk about that right now, Drum, because it is so real and will be so prevalent moving forward.
Oh, absolutely. And, we touched on this a little bit earlier. In 10 years, we're going to have 500,000 less people as freshmen than we currently have right now. And that's going to make the enrollment woes go up. Let's face it, the peak number of 18-year high school graduates will peak this next year at about 3.9 million, followed by a 15-year decline. This is going to be very challenging. Again, I go back to the mature to declining industry, more capacity than you have, quote, customers.
Yep.
The challenge is going to be competition. Higher ed doesn't like to think itself as being in competition with anybody. But guess what? You are. The institutions that are being affected the most are those rural serving institutions, the smaller ones, your Christian colleges. We talked about that a little bit ago. The demographic cliff is going to have significant impact on many institutions. When you stop and think about it, and this is just something that kind of came to me, if you think about an institution that has 10,000 students, which is not a bad number, if you're dropping 500,000 students, that's 50 institutions that are going to be impacted. Or if it's 1,000, that's 500 institutions that are going to be impacted. These are huge numbers.
And to your point, and to the prior conversation, they're either going to go away, or the other part is they might be consumed or transitioned into being a part of another institution. So consolidation may be the lifeline, such that it is, to some of these institutions as well.
That's a great point, Tom, because what I typically have seen is higher ed institutions wait too long to consider being acquired by another institution. Let's face it, if if you go into the marketplace and you say, "Hey, I can buy a particular company that is profitable, declining trends, but it's going to help with my offerings in the marketplace, i.e., there's a new product or a better product, or in the case of higher ed, a new curriculum, a curriculum we don't have, a better one, better faculty, better research." You're willing to go ahead and make that leap of faith. And there are institutions out there who are looking for good targets. But if you're down the road and you've got 40 million in debt and you don't have a name, you've got pretty good faculty, but it's nothing to write home at, who really wants to acquire you? The challenge is the boards are not looking forward far enough, and they feel like if they sell the institution that they have failed. That is absolutely different than an entrepreneur thinks about it. An entrepreneur, they may do great. What's their crowning achievement? Selling the company, their exit strategy. We need to start thinking more like entrepreneurs in higher ed. And I know that comment will have reverberations for a long time, but we really need to. We need to take, boards need to take, and presidents too, need to take their fiduciary responsibilities very seriously. They do for the most part, but they need to also look at it from a long term perspective and don't be so attached to the institution, but be more attached to the students and what's best for them.
And one of the things I'll just add to there, and I agree with you. And so this is, as I often have heard people say, I'm in violent agreement. So my violent agreement is one of the other things that those institutions are going to have to be mindful of as we potentially see those acquisitions or consolidations is the regulatory environment. There is a lot of greater regulatory impediments or challenges to changes of ownership or changes of control now under the new regulations than there were previously. And they apply to all institutions. A lot of them, let's be honest, were written with the for-profit and the private nonprofit consolidations in mind. But as we talk about this potential declining, maturing entity that is higher education, and some of this in traditional academic settings, they've got to play by those rules too. So that's going to play into it as well.
Yeah. Except, except with a new administration coming into town, I think, and this will be one of my predictions, I think a lot of these regulations that were put in place, or these rules. I'm speaking with somebody who really understands the difference between regulations and rules, and I have to be real careful with my language on this. But I think a lot of these rules that have been put in place are going to get scrapped.
I think so. And again, you and I have had conversations with your listenership as in the past about the Loper Bright case and deference to Chevron and the fact that a lot of these regulations are going to be challenged across all cabinet level agencies, not just higher ed, but certainly higher ed to be
Mhm.
sure. So again, another thing for us to talk about in the new year.
Before we leave the demographic cliff, leave the enrollment, I think there's one other piece that's really a big question in my mind is the international students and deportation threats. There have been a number of higher ed institutions who have told their international students, be here prior to the inauguration, because once the inauguration happens, we don't know what's going to be able to happen with immigration. Institutions are concerned about this. If we have a drop off of international students on top of demographic cliff, that is really going to hurt higher ed institutions from an enrollment perspective. Enrollment equals tuition, equals dollars, equals staying in business.
So as we look at all of this and enrollments, what should institutions be looking at or considering right now? Wayne Gretzky always used to say that it's all about going where the puck is going to be, not looking at where it is currently. Where's the puck going to be, and what would you suggest for them to be doing?
Tom, there's a few things that institutions can be doing. One is academic realignment. You've got to take a look at your programs, which ones are profitable, which ones are not profitable. And unfortunately, that's going to require some significant, it may require some significant changes. Some institutions are doing dual enrollment, i.e., enrolling students from high school and allowing them to get their GE credits out. I mean, this is exploding in Idaho and in Indiana. This is a good thing. Many institutions will look at this as saying, oh my gosh, we're losing 2 years of potential tuition. Well, guess what? You're also speeding up your graduation rate. It's a positive thing overall. Many of them are moving to 3 year college degree, 3 year bachelor's degree. The New England Commission on Higher Ed, the Northwest Commission on Higher Ed. They have all been doing this for at least a year, if not longer. And HLC is now getting into that as well. So it's possible to get this approved. Is it going to require some changing around of where you do your general education credits and you get those AAC and U great things that employers want out of students? Yes, you don't necessarily have to have 4 English courses. You may be able to do 2 English courses, but then put in writing requirements and other courses to where people can understand good writing. They can work in teams. They can do critical thinking and all those kind of things. I think that's really important. There was another one that I just read about, which was amazing. Western New England University. It's part of a growing number of colleges that are offering direct admissions. Now, what are direct admissions? I mean, bypassing applications, bypassing recommendations letters, sometimes even the application itself. When someone graduates, they've got transcripts and they go, this person, good. We're going to go ahead and admit you to the college without even applying. And oh, by the way, we're going to give you X number of aid, a scholarship or something like that. Think about it from a student perspective. College approaches you and say, we want you to come here and we're going to give you these scholarships to do it.
What have you done for me lately?
What have you done for me lately? One. And two, do you really want me? They're going to usually go with their first or second institution that they apply to. Well, if you don't have to apply, it's just like, wow, I'm good. That says something huge to them.
Well, Drummond, it also speaks to the prior discussion about competition, a shrinking pool of individuals for a sustained and not necessarily overly constricting size of a group of incoming institutions. You're fighting more for all of the individuals, supply and demand.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So talk about public perception with regard to that. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to talk a little bit about OPMs in the online environment, because that plays heavily into this competition as well, no?
Absolutely. Public perception, we've already talked about how it's dropped significantly, but we've got 5 states who have done away with legacy admissions.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's huge. We've got some states who are actually legislating you cannot do legacy admissions. There's an elitist perception about higher ed, and these are some of the things that they're doing to combat that. Is that a bad thing? No, I don't think it is. People, if you really want to take DEI away and the premise of, you are admitted based on your own merit, not your skin color, not anything like that. And oh, by the way, not because your parents went here as well.
Correct.
That is leveling the playing field.
And to that end, also, again, you talked about it with Western New England University and others. As we're seeing more and more institutions also moving away from the ACT and the SAT, or even on higher level degrees and credentials, the MCATs and everything else being more optional than mandatory.
Except that you're seeing some institutions going back to those as well.
Right. And again, that's why I'm curious, because it does seem to be an ebb and a flow right now in that regard.
Yeah. I- Basically, I would not want to be an enrollment officer at a college or a university right now. You have as much or more headaches than the university president does. And with so many different things up in the air, you mentioned OPMs. You can probably talk better to this than I can with all the legislation that's bouncing around in college, with the rulemaking at the department, et cetera. OPMs have taken a major hit. 2U has actually moved away from, not completely, but they're doing more micro credentials rather than boot camps, things like that. That's what we're starting to see is more of the stackable credentials. We're starting to see more of micro credentials, not only coming from the OPMs, but coming from institutions as well.
Again, what about, and how does all this play with the faculty and the students, Drum? Again, you talked about the admissions individuals. This has got to weigh heavily on, let's be honest, the true providers of the education and the individuals that are receiving that education. No?
It certainly does. The public perceptions have obviously dropped, but there is a growing sense of student and faculty disengagement. I wouldn't say the majority, but I say a number of students are going there and they're looking at higher ed as just a check in the box rather than an opportunity to learn. I think in some ways this goes back to what's the word I'm looking for? The immediate satisfaction.
Instant gratification or things of that nature.
Yeah, what you said.
Yeah, that thing.
I think it goes back to that instant gratification part, but we're hearing more complaints than we have in the past about college. It's becoming more transactional, check in the box, rather than a hunger to dive into a particular subject. I remember talking with a faculty member back just after the pandemic, and faculty are completely burned out. They're having more and more duties putting on. They're becoming informal therapists for students. A student will come in the office, faculty member will say, "How's it going?" And they don't expect the student to unload on them, but the student does.
They do. Yeah.
So it's very, very challenging in that. We've seen this quote social contract break down with corporations and employees back in the 1980s and the 1990s when we had corporate structuring. It's not surprising that it's happening. There is this thing called tenure, which many states are trying to do away with tenure or post tenure reviews, et cetera. They think there's a lot of faculty out there who are deadwood that aren't doing it. Once they've got tenure, they coast. That's not really the case, but they're allowed to go out now that they have tenure. They can go out and do research in other areas. It's a hot mess.
Again, let's play this forward. You've talked about the levels of challenges for everything from admissions, obviously the instructors and the like. Governance has those issues as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I get so many different calls from board secretaries and board presidents about our board is not functioning well. I mean, I had one from a colleague of mine about a week or 2 weeks ago, and he told me my board is a mess. They can't make a decision. They're infighting, etc. Can you come help? I think the poster child for this really is North Idaho College, who's on show cause right now from the Northwest Commission because there's been so much political infighting. I think one of the casualties of this huge political divide that we have right now is the ability to negotiate, the ability to find commonality and leverage those points. Instead, it's become I'm right, you're wrong, and I don't like you, you're a no good SOB, etc., and I don't want to work with you. The days of the Senate being the last great deliberative body, as much as many folks don't want to do away with the filibuster, frankly, unless they do away with the filibuster, they're not going to get anything done. And that's going to have huge ramifications for the country.
So I'm watching the clock and I'm trying to be mindful. And again, this is the case with you and I. We kind of are going a little bit long. I want to hit on AI and also on accessibility of cost before we give proper credence to your predictions for 2025. So, want to talk a little bit about those and then go into predictions?
Sure. We talked a bit about AI a little bit earlier in the program. Some institutions are really embracing it. The Kogod Business School at American University, their dean of their College of Business directed, we're going to have AI in every class we have. It may be building AI, maybe just using it, etc. So in 20 courses, they've changed those courses to include that. We talked about Madeline Pumariega at Miami-Dade College. They're doing great. But then you've got the others. When it first came out, faculty were up in arms. I was doing a strategic plan with one institution, and I'll use AI. I'll input 5, 6, 7 different things and say, write me a vision statement. I did that. And it came out with a pretty darn good vision statement. The folks in the room said, we can't use that. We've just plagiarized it. It's like, okay, show me where it's plagiarized. So you've got the extremes of behavior. AI is going to change everything. University of Wisconsin faculty, they're concerned AI will replace them. No, there's great uses for it. Enrollment management. That is an incredible place to use it because you don't need the personal touch until later in the funnel. Measuring student outcomes. I haven't seen anybody doing this yet, but using every year's part of the accreditation process, you have to measure student learning outcomes called program assessment. Why not program AI to be able to do that for you rather than having a faculty member spending a week, 2 weeks on writing this up? You could have AI do it in a matter of 2 hours. You don't leave it to AI, you have a faculty review it, et cetera, but it makes perfect sense. So AI, we're going to see more and more use of AI in higher ed and in society.
Now, a little bit about accessibility and cost. I mean, we've talked a little bit about DEI, we've talked a little bit about a number of these pieces, but again, this is what's on the mind of a lot of people here in Washington, to be sure, is how do we grapple with accessibility, cost, as well as the fiscal interest as we look at all of these various issues?
It is a huge mess. It really is. More than 200 campuses have rolled back DEI efforts since April of this year, and that's according to the Chronicle of Higher Education. 86 campuses have changed policies, even though lawmakers didn't require them to do it. Restructuring, closing offices, changing job responsibilities. I mean, there's huge things going away. And I guess, WASC, because they were starting to come under fire proactively. I don't know exactly why WASC did this, but they backed away from the diversity statements and then backed away from the proposed changes when they had so much blowback from ACLU, many of their member institutions, et cetera. So DEI is going to continue to be a flashpoint. What it reminds me of is, and you probably remember this as well, that old reverse discrimination lawsuits that we had. So we're seeing change, University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, the provost has banned diversity statements in faculty hiring, promotion, and tenure process.
Yep.
I mean, major things.
All right. So I want you to take a deep breath. I want to
Okay.
say thank you very much. Again, I am always amazed at how well versed and well read you are. And again, to your credit and to your listeners' credit, all of what you bring to the passion with regards to your reporting on higher education and the like. Again, your A to A plus from 2024 is one of the reasons why I want to give credence and time for your 2025 outlook and your predictions for 2025. So, drum roll, and without further ado, all right, Nostradamus or Karnak, what do we got looking forward into 2025?
Well, I think the first thing is going to be politics.
Really, I'm shocked.
Well, out of deference to you, mine friend, HEA, we're going to see it to some degree. And I think you're probably right. It's not going to be a bill that gets passed independent where you've got to get past the majority in the Senate for debate. I think it's going to get done via budget reconciliation. I think that's probably the only way. I think we're going to see short term Pell. That is a priority for the Republicans. And I think, personally, I think it's a really good thing.
And Democrats alike, Bobby Scott, the Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act with Dr. Fox.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Department of Education going away? No, I don't see that. Does it need to be reorganized? I probably shouldn't go into this, but yes, it does. There needs to be some better clarity on what their roles, responsibilities are, especially in something I learned from you looking at the triad. How does that all work together? The triad being the attorneys general from the states, the accreditors, and the department. I think I got that right, don't I? Yeah.
You did. Well, let's not hold it to just the attorneys general, but the commissions that are in each state that are responsible and react and respond a lot to the attorneys general.
Oh, absolutely. See, this is why I have you along to keep me honest and make sure that I'm saying things properly, like rules and regulations.
There you go.
Yeah. So, student debt repayment, I don't see that having much legs. I really don't. Student debt repayment wouldn't be an issue if the cost of college was less, but there it is. Institutional accountability, yeah, I think we're going to see more of that, especially in the first 2 years, looking at outcomes, earning assessments. I think we're going to see all those.
And as a way to potentially get at some of the issues related to cost. So those are kind of, I like the fact that you brought those up simultaneously because there's a lot of nexus between those two.
Absolutely. Institutional oversight, oh my. We are going to see some change in the accreditors for sure. It's going to get legislated. Nasicki will definitely get involved with that. And Nasicki, unfortunately, has become much more of a political body than it used to be.
The National Advisory Committee on Institutional Quality and Integrity, for those that are not quite as familiar with that acronym.
Thank you. I appreciate that because I couldn't remember it. Closures and mergers. Yes, yes, yes. We are going to see an acceleration of that. I'm reading more and more institutions who are 2 weeks away from closing doors. People need to be aware, especially boards, of the impact that you have on your employees' lives, your students' lives, and your community's lives. If you're headed down that path, it's not a failure. What you're doing is making sure that you're taking all those people into account. Frankly, you've got four options. You can buy something, you can sell yourself, you can consolidate, and there's organizations out there that can help you do that and work back end, et cetera, build a system, whatever, or you can close. Which of those do you really want to do? It's not close. So the enrollment decline is going to happen. We're going to have a little bump in 2025 because it's really going to be the last good year before the demographic cliff. Plus, with FAFSA being fixed, which pretty much everything I've read it is, then we will be able to do that. But subsequent years, it's going to be difficult. Deportation threats, That is a wild card. I have no idea what's going to happen with that, but that could impact your enrollments. AI, embrace it. You've got to embrace it. There will still be institutions, and especially in faculty ranks, who will not want to embrace it, but you need to do it and figure out how you can use that to have students develop their own ability to think critically, i.e., generate something via AI and then make them go in and analyze it. And is it correct? How does it work? Etc. Free speech is going to continue to be an issue on campuses. There were many folks who were very upset about the reactions to the October 7th stuff. Think back to the Vietnam War, the protests in Berkeley on campuses and things like that. These are students. It's not wrong to be able to criticize things. It's wrong to get violent about things. And we've got to be able to remember that college is a place where students come to learn, most importantly, who they are and what they stand for. And part of the process of, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I am, but part of the process of protesting is them finding out who they are. And then lastly, DEI. I think given everything that I've seen, I think the efforts to stamp out DEI are going to continue. We've seen a lot of it. Are we going to see it to the same degree? It wouldn't surprise me. So those are my predictions.
We will see a year from now. God willing, we're both here and both healthy and well. A couple of key takeaways, very quick. Alliteration. I see you talking a lot about disruption.
Yes.
A lot about deregulation, and a lot about direction, meaning the direction and the changing that both the public and the families and students are already taking and how that will impact higher education. And then the direction, as in the organizational direction, by all of the governance structures and all of the levels within the educational environment, needing to, again, be adaptive and willing to participate and get involved in those processes early and often. Fair?
Absolutely. I think the days of a college or a university board meeting once or twice a year are going the same way as the dinosaur. Boards have got to stay engaged much more. And remember that old adage, NIFO, nose in, fingers out. You're there to provide oversight. You're not there to run the college.
Well, I want to say thank you. I hope I lived up to Deb's prior efforts in this regard. I, again, am astounded, as I said earlier, about the wealth of knowledge that you possess and certainly the passion that you bring. And I just wanted to say, Drumm, thank you for letting me sit on the other side of the process for once. I enjoyed it, and I hope that you did too.
Tom, thank you so much. I did enjoy it. Deb has always done a fabulous job, and you have stepped in very admirably for her. So thank you for spending this time. It's been fun to look back at these things with you. You bring such a unique perspective to higher education. You've been in it so long from multiple different levels. I just want to thank you for all your service that you've done for this community.
Thank you very much. And happy holidays to you, my friend.
And you as well. Looking forward to a wonderful 2025. Thanks for listening this week, and a special thank you to my co-host, Tom Netting. Tom, it was a pleasure working with you on this end of year, and as always, you never cease to amaze me about your knowledge about Washington higher ed and the political process. Thanks again. I really appreciate your taking the time. I also want to give a special shout out this time of year to my team that helps me put these things together every week. Tamara Taylor from Show Up Strong, who's my website extraordinaire person and also takes care of the majority of the marketing. And then David White from David White Voice. Without the two of you, I don't know how I would be able to succeed in doing all the things that the change leader does for higher education. So to the two of you, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all that you do and all that you've done over the years. Folks, special thank you to you as well for tuning in as often as you do. I've really enjoyed doing these podcasts, and I especially enjoy it when I hear great comments back from our audience saying, I really learned so much about that. That's the whole purpose of doing these things. And so thank you for tuning in, and I hope you all have a wonderful and very successful 2025.
Changing Higher Ed is a production of The Change Leader, a consultancy committed to transforming higher ed institutions. Find more information about this topic, along with show notes on this episode at changinghighered.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to the show, and we would also value your honest rating and review. Email any questions, comments, or recommendations for topics or guests to podcast@changinghighered.com. Changing Higher Ed is produced and hosted by Dr. Drumm McNaughton, post-production by David L. White.